We appreciate all that you and Dr. Cool and Augusta University have not only been doing with what we're seeing here today on this great tour, but also just been the partnership that you all have played with the university system, the leadership role that you have taken with the app, working with the Georgia National Guard, which let me just take 1 minute to mention the Georgia National Guard. I will promise you they're doing as much as any National Guard anywhere in the country. We have had people for well over a month now sanitizing and doing infectious disease control, teaching those practices and doing those practices themselves in our long-term care facilities and our nursing homes. They've been manning our testing sites. They've been working with the folks at Augusta University to organize that in over 100 sites all over the state. They've had mobile strike teams so we could move very quickly to places that we needed to get to in a very short period of time. When we saw especially that some of our static sites were not getting that much volume out of them, and then not to mention delivering, I believe, up over 2 million meals working with the Atlanta school system and other food banks around the state. I saw some of them yesterday at America's Second Harvest down in Savannah. And then we've obviously all seen what a great job they've done working in conjunction with local law enforcement to make sure that we're having peaceful protest for all those that saw injustice with our own eyes and want everyone's voice to be heard in a safe way, but also protecting people's property and possession. So I'm very proud of the Guard. I appreciate the leadership of Doug Duncan and Columbia County. Commissioner Allen's here with us today. Really the whole commission taking the leadership. Doug called me and he said, "Governor, I want to do this." He saw some news about antibody tests, and I want us to do that in Columbia County. And I said, well, okay. And I made one phone call and put him in touch with our folks. And next thing you know, here we go. We're at this amazing site, great partnerships with the whole local community. So Doug and Trey and the rest of the commission, we appreciate your support. I did want to take just a minute to thank the local legislative delegation that's here with us today. They have been longtime friends of mine, number one, with Jody Lott being one of my floor leaders. Chairman Fleming and I served together and have worked together for years, especially when I was Secretary of State on elections legislation. And Lee Anderson and I have been friends for a very long time. But I just appreciate their support in the fight against COVID, the ability to do something we've never done in this state before, to have a public health state of emergency. That is not an easy thing for people to get their arms around and understand, because you're given a lot of authority and decision making to the governor, whoever that may be. And I believe we have used that decision process wisely, but it's been very valuable for us to be able to engage the Georgia National Guard, to waive certain regulations and healthcare rules to protect our healthcare workers, our doctors and our nurses, and those that are on the front lines from certain liabilities in this unusual time, to allow folks from out of state to be able to practice medicine here without having to go through a bureaucratic process that takes too long, so that we can be ready to fight this pandemic at the peak. These folks also supported funding that's allowed us to buy PPE, to set up testing sites, to buy our most mobile hospital pod units that allowed the state to be able to have the bed capacity when the peak got here, which was what the whole shelter in place and the shutdowns you saw across the country was all about, was building that capacity and being ready when we had our peak. And that's exactly what we did. So thank you all for your support in that. And we are in a really good place because of all of us working together on the fight against COVID-19 at the university system level, at the local government level, with state government partners from really a lot of different agencies, public health, GEMA, State Patrol, the Georgia National Guard literally flying PPE supplies at a moment's notice when we literally had hospitals that had an hour or two of supply left. Life-saving efforts that all of us have worked together and our teams have worked together on the fight against COVID. But we are in another fight now, as you all know, and that is the fight to reopen our economy. We cannot continue to stay shut down. There's a lot of negative effects of that I felt when I made that decision that were getting to the point they were outweighing the negative effects of the virus itself. The lack of number of domestic and child abuse cases that we're seeing because our kids are not in school, because people are not in public places where that is being seen and reported. People weren't going to their medical providers where those things were seen and reported. Mental health issues, which we've all been reading about, and something that First Lady Marty Kemp, who's with me today, and I have talked a lot about, and that she is especially concerned about, just like the nation's First Lady, Melania Trump. And not to mention the livelihoods of many hard-working Georgians that were on the verge, quite honestly, of losing everything. The inability to make their car payment, to pay their rent, to provide, medical medicines and medical services to them and their family. The demand we were seeing at our food banks, I've heard that both in the last 24 hours in Augusta and in Savannah, at how big the need, even as we're coming back now, continues to be. So we are in that fight as well. And I'm so proud of the many businesses that I have seen all across the state that have innovated and done unique things to keep their employees and their patrons safe so that they could safely reopen, but also as to what they have done as we have given back, or they have given back to their local community. I saw 3 or 4 different businesses in the last 24 hours in Savannah and in Augusta that are doing exactly that. They're giving back to the local community. They're helping, their neighbor. They're helping their neighboring business. It has been remarkable to see, all of what us as Georgians have been doing, and folks in the private sector have been doing that maybe weren't as well off as they were, or had been inversely affected worse by the virus than others had. So that is why we have to continue to follow data and the public health advice of people like Dr. Toomey and a lot of our partners that we've been working with across the state to continue to slowly, methodically reopen our economy in a very smart way and continue to keep people safe, to mitigate the spread the best that we can, but also be prepared for whatever may come our way. And that's what we're going to continue to do. I did want to make a few brief remarks about the recent protests that we've had. I spoke to Mayor Hardy Davis earlier today. I've spoken obviously to Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta, to Van Johnson in Savannah, Kelly Gertz in Athens, and many other local elected officials across our state, as well as law enforcement of folks like Neil Jump and others down in Brunswick. There was a hearing for Ahmaud Arbery today. We've got a strong state law enforcement presence that is on the ground. They're on the ground to support Sheriff Neil Jump. If he needs us, he will call us. Thankfully today, as has been over the last month, because of our willingness with Captain King from the State Patrol, that is our lead down there, working with Sheriff Jump, with the local organizers that have been peacefully protesting for weeks now. We have seen no issues in Brunswick as the time that I walked in this building. And that is exactly what we want to see around the rest of the state. And for the most part, that is what we have seen. Unfortunately, we have had some unruly people in Atlanta that tried to disrupt peaceful protests, which I support. I know our state and our citizens have seen with their own eyes the injustice that happened. They are shocked, as I am, and we all want justice. And there are a lot of people that want to voice their support and their concern for that, which I completely understand, and support. And that is why the Department of Community Supervision, the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, and many other people, including the National Guard, that have been in the State Operations Center under a statewide state of emergency for the last 4 or 5 days, monitoring and partnering with the local governments and their local police departments to keep our streets safe, to keep the lives of the protesters safe, and to protect the property and businesses of our people. And for the most part, we have done a great job, and I will say that we've been very lucky. I would think that we're lucky because we have worked hard in partnerships with people, but we also have enough resources on the ground that is a large deterrent to people that think they can come to our state and disrupt what some peaceful people are trying to do. And my message continues to be to them that they need not come to Georgia if that is what their agenda is. If they have a different agenda than seeking justice and demanding justice because what we have seen happen to Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, they need to go somewhere else, because we're going to continue to support those efforts. I did want to break a little information to you this afternoon that we've had the GBI working on in conjunction with a lot of the intelligence community. And this data goes through June the 1st. Of the 370 arrests that we've seen in the state, 57 subjects were from out of state. Obviously, the majority, 294, were Georgians. We had more than 30 instances where an arrest subject had a significant criminal history, including charges that could be consistent with prior involvement in violent civil unrest. Multiple subjects have active warrants at the time of their arrest. The average age of the subjects was 24. The youngest arrested has been 17. The oldest has been 69. Multiple instances of subjects with history of willful obstruction and assault charges suggest prior involvement in similar activities. We do have a 34-year-old male from Minnesota who was arrested in Atlanta, and analysts are working to confirm his involvement in the Minneapolis riots prior to his travel to Georgia. We have a Florida resident who had multiple obstruction, trespassing, assault charges out of Missouri near the end of the time of the Ferguson civil unrest. The subject was arrested in Atlanta and live streamed his post-arrest detainment to social media while handcuffed with APD. He is also a convicted felon. We've had 10 or more subjects that were bonded out by one state, 10 or more subjects were bonded out by one out-of-state individual, suggesting potential coordination from outside influence. We are continuing to look into that. The GBI and GSAC is coordinating with federal law enforcement as well as multiple state agencies in the region to deconflict arrest data and link associations for individuals who travel to multiple states for violent engagement. So we're going to continue to monitor that. I will note that of these arrests from those out of state, they represent 21 different states: Alabama, Missouri, Minnesota, Arkansas, North Carolina, Maryland, California, New Jersey, Michigan, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, New York, Virginia, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Kansas, South Carolina, Maine, and Tennessee. The GBI will be, and Director Reynolds will be releasing more of this information here in the next few minutes. And you can follow up with them for additional details, but we're going to continue to monitor the intelligence on the last couple of days of arrests that we've had, as well as other intel that we're getting on potential events for this weekend. With that, we'll open it up for questions.
We'll start with WJBN.
How you doing, Governor Kemp?
Doing great.
Good. I took a tour on Monday, and Dr. Cool told me that the antibody testing facility is to gain intel, analyze, and take some of that study, so research study. So what do you hope that that research study can help open the state of Georgia back up?
Well, I certainly may let Dr. Cool speak to that, because I'm sure he's more knowledgeable than I am on all the metrics and what data that they can get. But I think the good thing about the antibody testing, number one, we were talking earlier about the survey that people are taking, as well as the test itself will have corroborating data, if you will, to target kind of when people may have had the virus if they test positive, which I think would be very interesting. I have always felt for a long time now, after we got into this, that the virus was here much earlier than we realized, which, you know, alleviates to the community spread that happened long before anybody really even knew what COVID-19 was. But I also think it will continue to give us just more scientific data on, you know, what the community spread has been like and where that was happening. You know, we've worked with the Georgia Department of Public Health, worked with CDC to do a similar thing in a metro Atlanta neighborhood. So I think having, you know, other areas of the state doing this, I know Albany's thinking about doing it. I've talked to Chairman Cohias about that. I think we'll continue to give us more information of, you know, why it spread so fast, when it was here, and much more, but I'll let Dr. Cool speak.
We'll add one more piece to the puzzle about this disease. This has been one of the trickiest diseases of my career, and I think probably Dr. Vasquez would probably share the same sentiment, that this has been a very tricky situation to get our hands on in terms of medical information and understanding the disease. So this study will allow us to add one more piece to that puzzle to help pinpoint, was this present in our community sooner than previously thought? How prevalent has it been? How many people using, for example, those emergency services workers who continue to work, the school teachers who may have been exposed prior? It'll help us garner information about the prevalence of the disease, how long it's been in the community, and how many people have developed antibodies to it.
Anybody else?
You mentioned AU several times publicly. What kind of difference have they made in your approach to COVID-19?
Well, I think, you know, it's interesting, and history will be a judge of this, but when you look back and see when we actually started and when we put the coronavirus task force, when I put the coronavirus task force together, all the different folks that we had involved way back, really before we even had a single case in the state. And I remember specifically when we had the first case, because the media, you know, in Atlanta covered it for 3 days, because we didn't have another case for 2 or 3 days after that. So that was the only thing people would focus on, to where, you know, we're at a point, you know, where we've had days where we have over 1,000 new cases, and, you know, really tough days out there. But AU has been a partner early on in this, and really our whole university system is. When we were, I mean, look, they have helped us, Dr. Keel, you may have to speak to this, but they have helped us take ventilators out of their teaching facilities to make them available. We have used their lab supplies. They have donated PPE to hospitals. What else am I missing?
Swabs.
Yeah, they, with the Augusta University's innovation to create their own swabs for the molecular testing. I mean, I could go on, and that's really what everybody has done. You know, everybody has stepped up to say, hey, what can we do? What can we do to be part of this fight? I mean, that's what America's great at. I mean, I'm reading a book right now about Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin's interesting ally partnership that they had, and that's really what Americans did back during the war. I mean, they all came together when, you know, our great-grandfathers and grandfathers were overseas, and, you know, their wives and children were at home, and they were on the front lines of the manufacturing efforts and everything else to supply the war effort at a really tough time in our country. That's exactly what happened at the start of COVID. We've seen that, you know, for months now. It's really very impressive. But Augusta University's been a big part of that, and they're a big part of our state in a lot of other ways that we're very proud of.
Governor Damon Klein with the Augusta Chronicle. If you don't mind, I have a couple of questions for you. so they're both fairly quick. The first is, you caught a lot of flack, mostly from the national media, when we started reopening the state. Given the COVID numbers that you see, and you're seeing them on a daily basis, we've kind of plateaued. There's some spikes up and down here and there, but overall, do you feel vindicated with the decisions that you made?
Yeah, well, I've gotten that question a lot. I try not to say vindicated. I really think history will be the judge of that. We are not out of the fight yet. We're continuing to keep our foot on the gas with making sure that people are being smart to fight the virus and to mitigate the spread. I've definitely seen that in the private sector, the businesses. I stayed in a great hotel in Savannah last night. I was very impressed. I mean, they have the little breakfast place they usually do. Well, now they're doing brown bag, grab and go, so they don't have people mingling in the lobby. They got stickers on the floor at the check-in desk. They're cleaning the elevators all the time. I've been in other businesses where they limit, in work environments where they limit the number of people in elevators. So people are doing great. We got to keep our foot on the gas. But we're also, because of that, our numbers continue to look really good. When I got our update for yesterday's number, late yesterday afternoon, our numbers look really good. On our 10 o'clock, I haven't gotten the totals for today yet, but on the 10 o'clock call we do every day, our hospital bed capacity dropped again overnight. It's the lowest amount of COVID patients we have hospitalized since April the 8th. We had a over 40% decline in COVID patients in our hospitals in 30 days. So those numbers are great. So even when you're seeing our testing numbers continue to, on certain days, bump up or maybe be higher than other days, you really have to keep watching the 7-day rolling average, because we've seen the weekend numbers are really unreliable. So we don't even hardly pay attention to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday numbers until you get Thursday and Friday and look at that whole 7-day period. That's really when you can kind of see where you are. So we feel, Dr. Toomey and I both feel very comfortable about where our numbers are since we've reopened. Plus, we just have the capacity. And we got to remember, the reason that we slowed things down and shut some things down back when we did was to prepare for the peak, to have the hospital bed capacity, to have the PPE supplies, and to be able to have the testing, which is what Augusta University has been a big part of that, as well as private sector companies. It's been a public-private partnership in the best sense of the word. Have testing. Dr. Toomey told us on our call, I think it was 2 days ago, she had been shooting to hire 1,000 contact tracers before the middle of June. She feels like she'll beat that deadline. So I know we have well over 500, maybe 500 or 600 people that are already doing contact tracing. Those are all the things that you needed to be able to reopen. And we have that now. So even if we have an uptick of cases, we're prepared to deal with that. What we got to continue to focus on is not have widespread community outbreaks. That's why we're focused every day on our nursing homes and our long-term care facilities. General Carden and the National Guard, they continue to clean nursing homes every day. We continue to do as the president, the vice president asked us to test every nursing home resident and staff. I know as of 2 days ago, we had tested over 75% of the residents and I think over 42% of the staff. I'm sure it's more than that now. So, and we told people 2 weeks ago, when we do that, our numbers are going to bump up because we're testing a more vulnerable population. So we knew it was going to throw our numbers off, but you know what? That's fine. We need to be targeted on the people that this virus are the hardest on, and that is our elderly and our medically fragile. We're seeing now that our healthier populations, if they behave correctly and do the things that we're asking, even with us being reopened, we're not seeing widespread community spread, and we're not filling our hospitals back up. So right now we're doing great, but we gotta keep fighting both battles. We gotta reopen the economy, but we can't forget how we got to this point, and that's by following the advice of our public health officials. what was the second one?
The second one is addresses some of the unrest that you were speaking about earlier. And you were asked this question earlier today by a colleague of mine, and my apologies, you weren't given the proper context on it. So if I could just kind of read what I've written down that gives, I think, the proper context. So the president has called on the governors to, quote, dominate the streets and states where there's been problems, and he said that he would be willing to deploy the military to locations where local officials are unable to control has opposed making the Insurrection Act, opposed invoking the Insurrection Act to permit the president to federalize National Guard troops to respond to any riots. So my question to you would be, do you support or do you believe it could be appropriate to use military force to quell protests and unrest up to and including riots?
So what kind of military force? You talking about the United States active duty military, the National Guard, or
U.S. military?
I mean, I don't see a need for us to do that in Georgia because we have deployed, as the president was asking governors to do, he's like, use the National Guard. I had no problem doing that. As General Cardin says, your Georgia National Guard, my National Guard, we're not an occupying force. We're not on the streets in local communities around Georgia to try to take over the local police department. What we are there for is to be able to help them keep their communities safe and keep the people that are law-abiding, whether they're protesting, whether they live there, whether they have a business there, or whether they're just out watching the amazing situation that we continue to find ourselves in our state in the middle of a pandemic and these protests. That is what they're doing. We have been asked by local governments to provide support. We've done that in many ways. We have the Georgia State Patrol. We got the Department of Corrections Incident Response Team. We have post-certified law enforcement folks from Department of Natural Resources, your rangers that you've seen on the beaches patrolling to make sure that folks were following the guidelines for COVID-19 over the last month or so on the coast of Georgia and in our state parks. They've been on four-wheelers in downtown Atlanta helping support the Atlanta Police Department. Department of Community Supervision officers, anybody that was a post-cert, we had the GBI engaged, and the National Guard. We're all there to support local law enforcement. We have Major Hampton from the Atlanta Police Department that's been in the State Operations Center every night with our team. I wasn't there last night, but from Friday through till last night, I've been there every night, many nights for very long hours with that whole team, and we're coordinating with the Atlanta Police Department on what they're allowing, what they're going to do when the curfew hits, and how we're going to handle the bad actors. And I think it's important for people here in Augusta, and Mayor Davis and I talked about this today about the peaceful protests here. That's the way it's been around most of the state, and that's the way we expect it to continue to be. And people that don't want to do that, they don't need to come here because they are going to run into a sizable force of state law enforcement and National Guard that's standing by to work with and support the local police department. And we're going to continue to do that as we continue to plan. But what's been happening, even in Atlanta, where we have had to take some more aggressive measures, they were only taken after the curfew, and after the peaceful folks that had gone home and they were, their leaders were saying, we're going home, we're going to come back tomorrow and do it again. They were urging their people to leave. But when you have instigators that are in that crowd that start putting gloves on so they can throw the smoke or tear gas canisters back at the military and at the police, carrying around gallons of milk to pour in their eyes to cut through the tear gas, pulling rocks out of their backpack to throw at police officers, and those type of things. that's when we will come in and stand shoulder to shoulder with the Atlanta Police Department and any police department to make sure that we clear the streets and arrest those unruly people that are basically, well, they're not basically, they're assaulting our police officers. I mean, we've literally seen people, police officers, our friends and neighbors, people that live, you know, in our neighborhoods, keeping our streets safe, protesters spitting on them, throwing rocks at them. And we had a trooper that got his thumb broken by a rock the other day that came flying in. They're throwing water bottles at him, lighting fires in the middle of the streets. I mean, these are the kind of people that need to be dealt with hard and swiftly, and that is what we're going to do. But if you are a person that simply wants to let your voice heard, to demand justice, I want you to know that your National Guard, your Georgia State Patrol, and all those other state agencies are working very hard to keep you in a safe environment. And I have told friends from the NAACP and others, if you see unruly people that are infiltrating your demonstration and your group, you need to let the troopers or the National Guard know, and we will start watching those folks. And at the first sign of something wrong, we'll come in and deal with them, because look, these folks are worried about their people getting hurt by these unruly people that have a different agenda. So that is what we're doing in Georgia.
So what is your major concern with the marches and protests that's going on?
Well, my major concern is for those that want to come to and use those venues, and sometimes, I hate to say chaos, but just the fluidness of those events with a lot of people, it's very easy for folks to infiltrate into those crowds looking like they're part of the protest and then start either agitating people or doing things kind of from in the crowd that makes it appear that the whole crowd is doing that. And you know, we've seen in other states there's bad situations that can happen. That is probably the thing that's toughest for us is, or for me, watching all this and being on the front lines and, you know, saying, yes, we need to do this, or no, we don't need to do that. But it's also tough for the people that are on the ground out there when you have these unruly folks that are going around to, you know, folks that come from all walks of life and all demographics, taunting them that are serving in the Georgia National Guard or serving in the Georgia State Patrol or Atlanta Police Department or any police department around the state. You know, our folks have been working really hard. They've been working really long hours, and they're I wouldn't say they're tired, but they're like everybody else. You get worn out when you do this day after day, and we've been doing a good job, I think, the leadership has, of resting our troops and circling, you know, switching them in and out. But at some point, just like the people that are demonstrating, they were aggravated because what they saw, the injustice that they saw, and I get it. But at some point, the people that are trying to keep them safe, those that are protesting, if they continue to be treated by these outside interests, wherever they come from, in Georgia, outside of Georgia, you know, they have a short fuse too. And we're having to be very careful with them. I know the other night we had 3 generals, Cardin, Simmons, and Grabowski were all out there, and they were telling every one of their guys, look, be patient, don't lose your cool. You know, if somebody assaults you or if somebody, you know, targets you, you know, you take them down, but that's it. You know, take them down, cuff them, and, you know, we'll get them to an Atlanta police officer. And that's what we're going to continue to do. I've been very proud of our troops and our troopers as to how professional they have been and how they've been working with the people that want to organize and have peaceful protests, and we're going to continue to do that. I think I mentioned earlier, we've been doing that in Brunswick, I know, for over a month. I've lost count at how many protests there's been down there, but it's because we have people that work in the community. Sheriff Neil Jump and Captain Thornwell King of the Georgia State Patrol that grew up on the coast, that's been working with the organizers and saying, hey, we're going to have people here to keep you safe. And they're not intimidating. You know, you probably wouldn't even see them if you went down there. but they're there. And they're going to be there for the rest of the week to make sure we don't have any issues in Brunswick.
Do one more record. In the midst of so many other things here in Georgia.
Because it'd be good for business. Be good for our hoteliers, be good for our restaurant owners, be good for our sound stage people that set up stages, be good for our bus companies. I actually had someone I had lunch today and said, hey, if you get that RNC thing, he said, we've done logistics for them before with bus transportation. We're ready to roll. So, I mean, that's why we do it. We'd obviously work with them to do it in a safe way, which I think that you actually could. But that's, that was what my thinking was there.
Do you think it could be held peacefully with all of the unrest that has been going on?
Well, look, political conventions on both sides of the aisle have been unpeaceful in the past. I mean, I've been to several of them. You always have demonstrators. You have people, just like in the protests that we're seeing now, that want to use, something that is part of the fabric of our country, no matter what political side of the aisle you're on, whether a Democratic convention, Republican convention, or what have you, that want to take advantage of that situation and, make some sort of statement or cause some sort of disturbance, or worse than that, hurt somebody. So, I mean, you're always going to run the risk of that. Look, this is America. We can't run because we're scared of doing something. I told people over a month ago when we reopened, it's one thing to be scared of the virus. It's one thing to be scared of what may happen tonight in Atlanta, or this weekend in Atlanta, or this weekend in Athens, or be scared of what was going to happen in Brunswick. But we cannot be afraid of that. We got enough smart people that are at Augusta University and in our law enforcement and our elected officials that know how to build bridges and figure things out. And I'm convinced we're going to continue to do that on all these issues.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.